let's not talk about what is happening between Taiwan
China.
and mainland China and Japan and China. For the moment, if we see just the South China Sea, their intimidation tactics against the Vietnamese, against Philippines, have been going up. The frequency between encounters in Philippine waters has certainly been going up. And now, as you pointed out, this degree of sort of belligerence where a huge destroyer is brought is something that I think the world needs to take note of. This is
The other thing is that what struck me in that video is that even after this collision, the 52 Delta CO, the Guilin, did not stop straight away. She
yes,
continued with speed and did one more maneuver,
yes,
to intimidate the Filipino vessel. So this also I found quite, you had a major collision at sea. The bows of a ship have sort of caved in all the way in the first at least 4 or 5 meters of them are practically gone.
yes.
And you decide to continue with your mission, instead of, rendering assistance right away. And that to a mission that is, I can understand if it's a wartime situation, etc. That means uh, at least the command team was on the Jirin was in a totally different frame of mind. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of WM Dialogues. I'm delighted to have as my guest today Admiral Shrikhande once again, who's well known to all of you, a close friend, colleague, and fellow resident here at Goa. I thought we'll discuss something topical today, and there's nothing more topical than the collision that took place between a PLA Navy vessel and a Chinese Coast Guard vessel on the 11th of August, roughly at around 8 o'clock in the morning, off Luzon, 100 miles west of Luzon, near the Scarborough Shoal. So let me start by first seeing the video. So that's quite a fascinating piece of film works, I would say, and not a sad way for any commanding officer to start his morning, I would say. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. There is this old quote, completely wrongly applied to Thucydides, where apparently in his 2,400-year-old history, it was attributed to him that he had said a collision at sea can ruin your entire afternoon. But, he never said it. It doesn't even matter who said it. But yes, you're right. I agree with you that it's. A collision at sea like this does not make anybody happy, and in this case, I'm sure the Chinese are internally concerned, although there are no signals about it. But so would be the Philippines armed forces, the Philippines government, because this is certainly something unprecedented that has happened. The only issue here is that these rash maneuvers were between two services of the Chinese government, and did not fortunately cause damage to the Philippines Coast Guard or Filipino fishermen.
So before I describe the incident in a little more detail, I mean, you started off with a quote, so let me start with another quote from Crenshaw. It's quite a telling quote that a good ship handler is one who never gets into a situation that demands good ship handling.
Yes, that's right.
So the incident, as you can see, is the two vessels. So the two vessels, the first is the Coast Guard vessel, which is a Type 056 Jiangtao class corvette, roughly around 1,500 tons, and 22 of these vessels were actually transferred from the PLA Navy to the PLA Coast Guard in 2021. And this was the last in the series. Her original name was the Ningde. She's 1,500 tons, so not large, but capable of doing around 24-25 knots. Some part of the weaponry was removed, but she still retained her forward 76mm gun, which you can see in the video. The other vessel, of course, is a Type 52 Delta destroyer, the Guilin, roughly around 7,000 tons in displacement, a large, very capable vessel. And the third vessel, of course, is the Filipino vessel, which is the BRP Suluan. And she was built, I think, Japanese built. In 2017, she was handed over to the Philippines Navy as a brand new vessel. She's not too large, 44.5 meters long, and carries a crew of around 25 people and capable of doing around 25 knots. So the big fellow here is a 52 Delta, the Guilin, the pennant number 164, which you can see in the video. So coming to the incident, sir, first let's get over the legalistic part on rules of the road, sir. Do you think ROR is applicable in this case?
That's a good point. Actually, perhaps, having seen that when two ships operate, even from, any single navy, and all of us have been at sea, you adhere to the principles of ROR, and on those fundamental principles of ROR, you put the template of naval tactical maneuvering, where ships often have to maneuver in close quarters with each other while attacking an enemy submarine, and you are expected to have sudden maneuvers. But all of that is done under the great principle of good seamanship. So in this case, I find that from the films that we have seen, is that on their part, probably both the PLA Navy destroyer and the Chinese Coast Guard corvette were both, I think, being more rashly maneuvered than perhaps the situation warranted, where apparently their motive was to push or intimidate the Philippines Coast Guard cutter out of those waters. But I think they were maneuvering very close to each other. There are reports which suggest that they were zigzagging even earlier.
Yeah, I think they did two such maneuvers prior to this incident.
And unluckily for them, for the third maneuver, they probably seem to have misjudged. I thought that in one case it is perhaps one doesn't know why the Chinese destroyer suddenly turned to port, that is to its left,
right towards the end.
Yes, right towards the end when the collision happened. And why did that happen? Because there is a possibility that there was a steering gear breakdown. She was doing much higher speeds than the Coast Guard ship and was, faster than the ship they were pursuing, the Philippines Coast Guard cutter. But nonetheless, after that, it again swerves to its right, that is to starboard. So it doesn't seem like a steering gear breakdown on their part. And I think perhaps it is difficult to second guess what both the commanding officers might have been thinking in those split seconds, or the bridge teams might have been thinking. But the other ship probably just didn't have time to get out of the way. However, as the film shows, there must have been two or three sailors in the Chinese Coast Guard ship who seem to have rushed into the forward part of the ship with the fender out, which tends to believe that in those few seconds they anticipated a collision and tried to prevent that. But we all know that in such cases the fender provides far less protection, and what happens sometimes is that two or three human bodies are also put into the fracas, so to speak, and it, it, it is quite likely that those two or three sailors who might have attempted this might have been hurt quite badly or lost at sea, because the picture, as you showed just now, of the forward part of the ship almost gone, seems to suggest that the collision was a very violent one. Although the bigger ship, the PLA Navy destroyer, seems to have had a bit of a glancing blow, at least from the pictures that we saw. So it was perhaps very poor seamanship on their part, and the good ship handling, as you mentioned, that was required in that split second, perhaps wasn't good enough.
So, two things I think what you pointed out, and one, of course, was which stand out to me in that video. One was, of course, the attempt to put fenders. I mean, putting fenders against a 7,000-ton ship that is coming your way is like trying to put, a grain of sand when a vehicle is coming your way. That is, I think that would be a good comparison. The other thing is that what struck me in that video is that even after this collision, the 52 Delta the Guilin did not stop straight away. Yes. She continued with speed and did one more maneuver, to intimidate the Filipino vessel. So this also I found quite, you had a major collision at sea. The bows of a ship have sort of caved in all the way in the first, at least 4 or 5 meters of them are practically gone.
Yes.
And you decide to continue with your mission, instead of, rendering assistance right away. And that too a mission that is, I can understand if it's a wartime situation, etc. That means at least the command team was on the Guilin was in a totally different frame of mind.
It does seem so. You might actually, you've touched a very good point. It is quite likely that the compounded errors of poor seamanship with this maneuver after that. We do not know exactly at what point. That might come out later through communiques that we might receive from Philippines, because Beijing is almost completely silent. They are upping the rhetoric in other ways, which we could discuss in the next few minutes. But what is important, as you mentioned, is that they continued with that. And all of us have grown on stories of other wars where commanding officers in action against, say, an enemy submarine had to take the hard decisions of going through survivors from a merchant ship, or
even dropping depth charges,
or another warship that had been sunk, and there were survivors in water, and still take the hard decision to drop depth charges, knowing that the depth charge possibly would not strike the enemy U-boat, but would certainly kill those survivors in water at quite a range. And those are the kind of hard decisions. But you're absolutely right that those circumstances are quite different
in combat. That is
in combat, where you go to mission first. Yeah. In this case, I think it was hardly a snap judgment that should have been made. Which brings me to a sort of deeper point: is that is there some basic rift or point of friction between the Chinese Coast Guard and the Chinese Navy. And we've discussed this earlier. About how China has created echelons for issues at sea, right from constabulary duties, as we would say, to military missions, where they have created, to my understanding, let's say 5 echelons. The lowest being their fishing fleet, then the Chinese maritime militia. The third echelon is the Chinese Coast Guard, and the fourth echelon are the sea forces of the PLA Navy directly under its command and control. And the fifth is this entire, what the West calls the A2AD structure
Right.
of the fort, as we have called it, the fort and the fleet, how they might impact at sea. So considering all this, has that sort of smart creation of echelons for escalation and de-escalation control somehow not worked too well in this very small incident, where between the Coast Guard and their Navy, they did not have enough coordination or enough pre-planning how to intimidate without ending up in a bit of a soup, as it were. So there could be these issues, and I'm not too sure how much of the discussions between the code of conduct in the South China Sea that is still under some dispute, it's a can that they are all kicking down the road, how it might be. So do you think such disputes, some resolution mechanisms, or such maybe in a sense confidence building measures, would they apply, not apply?
So before I answer that, so let me just again talk about the other issue you raised, which is essentially these echelons of what the Chinese call their cabot strategy, that they've got layer upon layer. And as you rightly pointed out, I mean, at least the three seagoing layers are the maritime militia, the Coast Guard, and then the grey hulls of the Navy. Now, in this particular case, I find it, surprising, because normally you'll find that on all these intimidation sort of steps which are taken by China, they are left to the maritime militia and the Coast Guard. Very rare do you see a grey hull participating in that. And even if you have a grey hull, normally a frigate, but a 52 Delta, is a capital warship. You're sending her right in to intimidate these small 44.5-meter craft, of the Philippines. This seems to be a deliberate method to, to really up the ante, I would say, several notches. Yes. When you get a grey hull in the middle of this to start doing, maneuvers of this nature against what is a relatively small craft. On the other issue that you've talked about, about mechanisms that are available for containing, for managing escalation control, I think the one that is all prevalent in the Western Pacific is certainly the Code for Unplanned Encounters at Sea, or the QUES, what is called, which was signed, in fact, in China itself, in Qingdao. It was signed during the 2014 WPNS, the Western Pacific Naval Symposium meeting. And in which, it's quite a comprehensive document that runs into several pages. The first, of course, is the definition part, so that you have a common lexicon when you talk about, everyone's on the same page on the lexicon part. The second is all about safety procedures, and here we are talking not about between the PLA Navy and the Coast Guard, but we are talking about the Chinese and the Philippines, the Filipinos, the safety procedures. So that pertains to safe speed, safe distances, and all that. And obviously here they've gone through all that. You're certainly not at safe distances when you're shaving past a stern.
Yes.
In this case. And the third is also, on interference with command and control systems or with submarine operations. So you have to be cognizant of all these when you have an unplanned encounter at sea. And the third part, I would say, of that is on communication procedures. What are the voice procedures to be used? What are the flag procedures to be used? What are the call signs to be used? So it's quite a comprehensive sort of document. But that seems to have been all thrown away over here, because I don't think, I'm sure there must have been safety distances specified. But that's not being applied over here. Yes. So they've obviously gone several notches beyond that.
Yes, that's right. And those are the parts that the world needs to be concerned about. We see this kind of belligerent behavior now from China for several years. And you're right, absolutely. The QUES itself is more than 10 years old now.
Yeah,
And
2014 and we are into
that's right.
2025. That's
That's
11
right.
years.
It's more than 10 years old, and it doesn't seem to it doesn't seem to be something that China has adhered to in several ways. You could say that Qs ought to ought to prevent EP3 type incidents where the American or Orion was forced down onto Hainan Island.
And they lost a J8. I mean, the
Yes,
Chinese lost a
that's
J8
right, and
fighter
they
in that.
lost. Or the other incidents where they are doing this with let's not talk about what is happening between Taiwan
China.
and mainland China and Japan and China. For the moment, if we see just the South China Sea, their intimidation tactics against the Vietnamese, against Philippines, have been going up. The frequency between encounters in Philippine waters has certainly been going up. And now, as you pointed out, this degree of sort of belligerence where a huge destroyer is brought is something that I think the world needs to take note of. This is not good by any standards, and I do not think it helps China anyway. The other aspect is that from what I have sort of understood from the exchanges at sea that take place, there is a lot of sort of government level rhetoric that comes out between communications between ships to say you are in our waters, we have sovereign rights, etc., rather than the immediate chatter that should prevent actually collisions.
Right.
You know
So
when
you're speaking at a different level.
Yes, you're speaking. Ships are speaking at a different level. It's the larger issues of sovereignty or something. As you mentioned, are cannot be transformed into a fender
Yeah.
that prevents a collision. So those are the kind of things that all sides there need to think of, and I expect I mean, you mentioned rightly that the Chinese maritime militia is perhaps the most active in this, and from what I have read about in the postscript for this incident, that about 8 or 10 more CMM vessels were seen, I think, participating in the search, and again, doing subsidiary intimidation against Filipino fishing boats
In this
or
area.
trawlers that were in that area. So even after this incident, they, instead of sort of calling a tactical pause or an operational pause, they seem to have gone up 2 or 3 notches above in the operational pressures that they want to bring in. And you see these tactics, and part of their strategy is being applied to Taiwan and Japan in the air dimension and in the water dimension. And closer to our home along the Himalayan borders, for a long time we've seen equivalents, terrestrial equivalents of these kind of probing and tactics, and kind of sort of create and try and puncture some pressure points, which of course we have withstood quite well and countered in some ways. But the point is that such incidents are and such tactics as part of PLA's strategy is what is of global concern.
So again, sir, two things I'd like to sort of talk about, and the fact that even we talked about the Guilin continuing to intimidate, and then the maritime militia also continuing with this tasking, because actually when a ship, if you take the Corvette, the 056, from 20-25 knots, you're coming to a grinding halt, sir. I mean, you're not only going to, if you've lost people on your bows or who are right in the forepeak area, etc., that you might have lost some, and apparently they would have lost some because they continued doing a search over there for several hours after that. But you can be rest assured, sir, when a ship of this nature moving at that speed comes to a grinding halt, there will be injuries right through that ship. I mean, I remember when the USS San Francisco hit an undersea mountain when she was going at high speed. I think there were at least 10, 12 people who broke bones, lacerations, cuts, they lost 2 lives, all because of a sudden stop when you come like that and you got metal around, people are getting flung all around the ships. So you can just imagine what chaos there must be inside that vessel. So that is
I think that's a very, very important observation. I had not thought about it, but the equivalent of whiplash injuries in say, in a bus accident,
Right.
apply here, and one expects that, in good order and road discipline, even bus passengers would probably be wearing seat belts where applicable, but often they don't. And the whiplash injuries like this, you're absolutely right, there could have been, a lot of injuries within a ship, and it just happens. Yes, I mean, 1500 tons of steel,
Coming to a halt, I mean,
coming, were moving at 20 knots, coming to, being forced to halt in 20 meters, would not be fun
Yes.
for anybody inside.
Yes.
And yes, certainly there could have been a lot of, I hadn't thought of that, but
And the second issue is that, this of course is a blue on blue incident where you've had a collision of this nature. So the downside and the danger of, you can understand, that sometimes, you're charged up and intimidation is one of the things that you use. But intimidation, as this incident shows you, always, increases the possibility of an incident, of
Yes.
it. And you mentioned the EP3 incident, of course, where J8, of course, was down. The Chinese lost a pilot and created a huge incident. That aircraft had to, land in Hainan, and thereafter there was quite a major effort to remove the aircraft from there. But you've had several such incidences like this in the recent past. I mean, where formatting on Australian P8As, firing of chaff which had been ingested into engines, etc.
Yes.
And in any of these incidences where either there's a contact between two aircraft or between two ships, or you cause an engine to sort of seize in the air or something like that, and there's loss of life, then if you don't have a strong escalation control mechanism, then you are onto an escalatory spiral.
Yes, that is true. Yeah, absolutely. I think what is probably required in the long term by those who are concerned by Chinese behavior, both at the government levels and so to speak at the deck level and the cockpit level, need to get together. And there are mechanisms, but they need to now be strengthened. And if you notice, the viewers would know that in the last 3 or 4 years, including the summit declarations, for instance, in the Quad declarations at the foreign ministers and at the summit level, they have flagged incidents at sea without naming China, and the need for preventing such incidents itself. In WPNs, these have been flagged. In IONS, navies are discussing these. These could be concerns, and I feel that such behavior is not actually furthering what China imagines is consolidation of its position. They are merely underscoring something that is not acceptable. And with more and more incidents, the worry, I think, sometimes is, how far will they go with such intimidatory tactics, and how much more will others need to do to be prepared for the worst effects of such behavior by the Chinese? How to modify Chinese behavior if the Chinese don't seem to be very keen of themselves modifying that, and it is totally within their hand. But what it sets up for is certainly, greater tension in the South China Sea, perhaps in the East China Sea also.
So, sir, I thought we'll end with one. Let's shift the situation to the Indian Ocean and see, are there any takeaways for us? Because it's always good for us to analyze these incidences and see
Yes.
what are the takeaways for us. In the Indian Ocean, I mean, we are fortunate that even though we've had our share of maritime disputes, we've had a dispute between India and Bangladesh. There's a dispute between Bangladesh and Myanmar on the maritime side. Of course, we have and both of these, I mean, have been handled, I would say, with a fair degree of maturity, where there was a PCA, a Permanent Court of Arbitration judgment between us and Bangladesh, and both parties decided to go to court, get the issue resolved, and abide by that. Unlike the South China Sea, where the Chinese have decided not to abide by the judgment. On between Bangladesh and Myanmar, they went to the International Tribunal on Laws of the Sea. Again, went for a resolution. As that was passed, again both sides have decided to abide by it. We have, of course, ongoing disputes regarding fisheries, both with Sri Lanka and with Pakistan. But I think we've handled these with a fair degree of maturity. Your comments on that, sir?
Yes, I think, if we take Sri Lanka, the sovereignty issues and the demarcation, etc., seem to be have been settled for a long time. It is traditional needs to fish where fish are, which could be on the other side of hyphenated lines on a chart, which neither fish realize, and often fishermen in their pursuit of sort of economic
Yes.
uh, uh,
Well-being, yes.
well-being for themselves,
Yes.
tend to transgress into the other one side or the other. But yes, you're right, absolutely. I think there is, despite all the tensions, despite issues that are of more local sort of politico-economic nature, in that part of India and that part of Sri Lanka, we have been able to discuss this no matter what. And there are patrols on each side to prevent issues from worsening. Although there have been some issues of shooting where Indian fishermen have been lost, but they have not been allowed by both sides, I would say, to escalate. And this is where even efforts like the Colombo Security Conclave, or various other bilateral agreements between India and Sri Lanka, I think are working towards uh, at least keeping a lid on possible problems and avoiding escalation to a state which creates discomfort and further tension between both sides. So I think that's a very good model. We don't see that, as you mentioned, we don't see that in the South China Sea as yet.
So I dare say, so even of course Sri Lanka we have very good relations with, but even with a country like Pakistan,
Pakistan, yes.
where we have a disputed, the Sir Creek area, there is a dispute over there with regards to, and an extension of that, because you've not decided on your international maritime boundary line. So there is an area which is disputed even at sea, and you often have fishermen that transgress. And they are sometimes picked up from their side and sometimes picked up from our side as to whoever's gone across. But even there, we have a working mechanism where you have a hotline between the two coast guards, and from time to time, these issues are resolved by might be the vessels are confiscated and auctioned, etc. But the people are sent back after some degree of some time of remaining in custody. But it's handled in quite a civil manner, I would say, at the end of the day. So. I would think that it would be interesting. Of course, it's early stages. It's only been 2 days since this incident is over. But it'll be interesting to see also as to uh, what are the, after an incident of this nature, is there likely to be any moderation by the Chinese on this, do you think? Or is it going to be, and because that will also, we can extrapolate that and see as to, in some extent, when it comes to incidents that take place on the land border also, we can sort of correlate and try and see as to how these issues are going to be handled.
Yes, it's very difficult to sort of, look into the future of Chinese behavior, but I hope they take lessons from this. I hope they have taken lessons from the continental border dispute, that India will fight back, and will take stronger positions to resist any such intrusions. We can see that in the South China Sea, especially the Philippine government is taking robust actions. They've built up their coast guard, they built up their navy, they are building up the armed forces to be able to counter such pressure more effectively. And at the core of it are issues of disputed territorial waters, of creating territory and economic zones, of dubious nature by the Chinese. And therefore, whether the Chinese are going to step back from that is probably difficult to forecast. Knowing their behavior over the last 20 years in the South China Sea, where there has been a steady ramping up of pressure tactics, and from the Chinese perspective, I think a very coordinated approach, a strategic approach towards consolidating various angles of the South China Sea, including the four-sha strategy,
Yeah.
that they are now coming in while trying to push the 9-dash line into the background, and it's very at one level. Um, many people who look at the maritime environment and international law might say, okay, the Chinese seem to be toning down the nine dash line rhetoric, but they are ramping up slowly the four Shah, the four sands strategy of internal baselines,
Lines, water.
and claiming it as internal waters and therefore EZ, etc. So those are worrying tactics. It remains to be seen how this pans out. But I do hope that the Chinese are drawing lessons both at the level of individual units that are deployed like this, at the level of the services in those theater commands, and at issues of command and control, because this kind of one-upmanship, no matter where it occurs, is probably never beneficial for that country. And I was just reading about in the current U.S. Naval Institute Naval History magazine about how a dispute between MacArthur, who wanted glory for his command or for himself really, in the Guadalcanal campaign, and where it made sense for Nimitz from Hawaii and the Pacific, that ocean area, to actually be the spearhead of planning for the invasion of Guadalcanal, and how they compromised, how Marshall and Admiral King had to compromise by shifting the operating areas, by 1 degree of longitude towards the west, or from American perspective, actually to the east, and creating a dividing line and telling MacArthur that once the troops are ashore, then the show is yours. So there are these kind of resolutions that are sometimes required, even when different services are competing between themselves, and it can do nobody any credit. But it's also an environment where the world also needs to sit up and take note. And certainly in India, we should be studying these incidents very closely.
So fully agree with you, sir, because in any events at sea, unwarranted escalation of the peaceful environment that is supposed to be prevailing at sea is in no one's interest. And therefore, it requires a high degree of maturity from all parties. You might be having disputes pertaining to maritime boundaries, etc. And one understands that these disputes may take time for a final resolution to, or an amicable resolution to sort of come about. But till then, there have to be procedures in place that do not, exacerbate an already complex situation and lead to an escalatory spiral that makes it all the more difficult to resolve that dispute in the first place. So it's counterproductive, an event of this nature. And therefore, it demands maturity, it demands some sort of a structured sort of solution, which actually exists in the form of both cues as well as the declaration of conduct. Only people are not adhering to that. And third, I think it demands a good degree of communications,
Yes.
that you should be willing and capable to pick up the hotline and speak to your counterparts that, this is, and we need to quell it. And probably even, I would say, send a message to your people at sea that, aggression to a point is fine, but do not carry it to a point where it becomes counterproductive.
Yes,
So,
that's a very important.
so these, I think, are the takeaways, and we will wait and see as to how things finally evolve. So with that, I just wanted to thank you once again for
Thank you.
participating
Thank
in
you
this,
very much. It was-
and look forward to many such interactions in the futures.
Thank you.